1947. Hiroshima, girl ghost whose shadow moved without. Chapter 1. Survivor in the epicenter. In the blistering heat of August 6, 1945, in the heart of Hiroshima, Japan, a 9-year-old girl named Akiko Tanaka became the epicenter of one of the most haunting and inexplicable mysteries to emerge from the atomic apocalypse. As the world's first atomic bomb, Little Boy, detonated 580 meters above the city at 8:15 a.m., unleashing a fireball hotter than the sun's core, reaching temperatures of 6,000 degrees Celsius, and a shockwave that flattened 90% of the city center within seconds. Akiko survived in a way that defied all medical probability and human endurance. Amid the 70,000 immediate deaths, vaporized in an instant or crushed under collapsing wooden homes, her small frame was discovered amid the smoldering rubble just 800 meters from ground zero. Her skin seared with third-degree burns, but her core remarkably unbroken. Her simple cotton dress incinerated to threads clinging like ghosts to her blistered limbs. Yet her shadow remained etched sharply on a surviving concrete wall behind her, perfectly crisp and unmoving, even as rescuers pulled her trembling body free from the debris. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment which city you're watching from. We read everyone. Thank you. And let's dive deeper into this nightmare. Survivor testimonies archived in the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum and early Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission, ABCC, reports from 1946 confirm Akiko's existence as Hibakusha victim number H47-019, though her full anomaly case was quietly buried in classified files by both Japanese and US occupation authorities to prevent post-war panic over residual radiation effects that might spark yokai superstitions or anti-American riots. What these suppressed documents, many only unsealed in the 1990s, hint at challenges the very foundations of nuclear physics, human resilience, and the fragile boundary between life, death, and something far more sinister, posing chilling questions about whether the bomb didn't just shatter matter, but tore open rifts in reality itself, allowing shadows to slip free from their owners. This is the story of a little girl whose orphan grief birthed a shadow that moved alone, softly naming the guilty scientists who unleashed hell from the sky, all in a shattered Japan under the heel of Allied occupation, where every blackened street whispered of unspoken horrors. Akiko Tanaka entered the world on a crisp autumn day in October 1936, right in the bustling heart of Hiroshima's Nakajima district, a neighborhood alive with the chatter of street vendors hawking grilled chestnuts and the distant clang of dockyard hammers. Her family was working class through and through, Father Takeshi, a meticulous clerk at the Mitsubishi Heavy Industries dockyard, tallying ship parts by lantern light long after dusk. Mother Yumi, a patient seamstress who stitched kimonos for neighbors amid the creeping wartime shortages, her fingers nimble as she mended faded fabrics under the soft glow of a single bulb. Akiko was a gentle soul from the start, the kind of child who folded origami cranes by flickering lantern light on summer evenings, her small hands creasing paper with a precision that belied her age, chasing fireflies along the banks of the Kyobashi River, where the water ran cool and clear, her bobbed black hair framing a face that lit up like dawn at the rhythmic boom of festival taiko drums during Obon celebrations. Classmates at her local elementary school called her Kage-chan affectionately, teasing her shy habit of lingering in doorways during games of tag, casting playful shadows on the wooden floors that danced longer than anyone else's, unaware, of course, how that innocent nickname would twist into prophecy amid the fires of hell. Life in 1940s. Hiroshima wasn't always shadowed by doom. In those early years, before the war fully gripped the city, Akiko's world was one of simple joys, helping Yumi thread needles while humming folk tunes about cherry blossoms, racing siblings of neighbors to the river with bamboo kites trailing like dragon tails, or pressing her nose to the window during New Year's mochi pounding, the sticky rice steam fogging the glass. Takeshi would return from shifts with rice crackers wrapped in kelp, rationed treats that made her eyes sparkle, and the family would gather around a low kotatsu table, sharing stories of Emperor Hirohito's distant speeches crackling over the radio. But by early 1945, as Imperial Japan staggered under relentless Allied bombing campaigns, war had caged her world in iron bands of fear. Air raid sirens wailed nightly like mourning spirits as massive B-29 superfortresses droned overhead like mechanical thunder, their bomb bays empty over Hiroshima for now, but promising doom. Rationed rice thinned to watery gruel stretched with sawdust, and school dissolved into grim factory shifts where children like Akiko folded parachutes for enemy bombs, her fingers cramped from endless creases. Takeshi drilled endlessly with the volunteer fighting corps, bamboo spears in hand against imagined invasions, while Yumi hid Akiko under loose floor tatami during every drill, whispering urgently, "Be my shadow, little one, quiet and close, like the cranes we fold." She'd tuck a fresh paper crane into Akiko's trembling fist, its wings a fragile promise of peace amid the growing darkness, a talisman Akiko clutched like life itself. That fateful Monday, August 6th, dawned with a cruel, deceptively serene clarity, a pale blue sky mocking the tension coiled in every heart. Hiroshima bustled under the iron fist of martial law. Schoolchildren in crisp white shorts swept streets of fallen leaves. Vendors bartered meager radishes and pickled plums from rickety stalls. Civilians shrugged off the single-plane alert as just another routine scout, the all-clear horn barely cold from the last false alarm. Akiko, obedient as always, had been sent by Yumi to fetch water from a communal pump 800 meters from what would become the hypocenter, a rusted hand pump shared by a dozen families where women gossiped about rice shortages. She paused there, bucket swinging from her arm, to watch a flock of swallows darting through the morning light like black arrows, their wings slicing the air, when the sky ignited without warning. It was a searing magnesium-white flash, blinding and utterly silent at first, expanding into a fireball of 6,000 degrees Celsius that turned morning to noontime hell, followed instants later by a thunderclap shockwave that pulverized fragile wood-frame homes into jagged splinters and clouds of dust. The blast wave hurled Akiko like a rag doll against a low stone fence half buried in dirt, the structure miraculously shielding her torso from the full thermal pulse as hurricane winds uprooted century-old trees and flames roared outward in a 1,000-meter firestorm. Glass shattered into flesh-shredding hail, metal girders twisted like licorice, and human screams were drowned in the roar. 80,000 lives snuffed in seconds, reduced to silhouettes on walls or ash drifting on black rain. Hours later, in the ash-choked twilight pierced by distant fires, soldiers from the Chugoku Regional Army Hospital, their uniforms singed and faces streaked with soot, dug her out from under a layer of debris. Third-degree burns blistering her arms and legs like molten wax, lungs raw from inhaled carbon monoxide and pulverized brick dust, but no fatal fractures, no ruptured organs, her heartbeat steady if faint. The light swallowed Otosan and Okeya-san, she rasped to a stunned nurse through cracked lips, clutching a singed scrap of origami crane miraculously tangled in her hair. Initial triage at the chaotic Asa River aid station, where the wounded floated bloated in the current, logged her as moderate picodon exposure. Expect alopecia, leukopenia, gastrointestinal hemorrhage. Standard grim prognosis for Kuriboshi, black rain, survivors poisoned by radioactive fallout. Transferred to a canvas Red Cross tent amid the moans of thousands, she drifted in and out of fever, whispering incoherently of a shadow that stayed behind to watch the fire dance. The days blurred into a hellish routine of maggot-ridden bandages and sulfathiazole ointment that stung like acid. Most thermal shadows etched by the blast's pulse, silhouettes of humans, streetcars, even ladder rungs, faded under relentless rain and the frantic scrubbing of reconstruction crews desperate to erase the apocalypse. Not Akiko's. On the gutted remnants of her family's garden wall, salvaged and relocated to an orphanage yard like a grim trophy, her silhouette persisted with unnatural persistence. crisp edges at 85% opacity even weeks later, defying weathering and erosion as if the stone itself had been carbonized into eternity with her form. Under the dim flicker of evening aid station lamps or the cold glow of moonlight filtering through bomb craters, it stirred subtly, lagging her gestures by full seconds as she shifted on her cot, fingers curling into waves when her own hands lay limp, evoking the frozen mid-air wave of a child desperately calling to vanishing parents. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, a 32-year-old physicist turned medic from Hiroshima Imperial University, himself a pre-war atomic researcher hastily reassigned to the fledgling ABCC team, first noted the anomaly during routine October gamma patrols with his clunky Geiger counter clicking like angry cicadas. His field log, scribbled in a battered notebook, later preserved in fragments, reads, "Hypercenter shadow anomaly, persistence greater than 30 days post-event, micro-undulations observed, 2 to 3 centimeters displacement sans subject motion. No phosphorescence or residual heat signature." He interviewed Akiko that afternoon in a screened-off corner of the coughing Hibakusha ward, where the air hung heavy with the stench of gangrene and iodine. She huddled cross-legged on her thin futon, eyes hollowed by profound loss, her small fingers folding cranes from scavenged ration wrappers, as if the act alone kept madness at bay. "Otosan waved goodbye from the wall," she said softly, her voice a fragile thread, tracing an invisible crane on her unburned palm with a charred fingertip. "He hurts so much inside the light. Says the light men must say sorry first, or the fire never stops." Nakamura, a rationalist trained in Kyoto's labs where he'd studied radium decay before the war, initially chalked it up to acute stress disorder, rampant among survivors, with hallucinations born from anoxia, epiphilous rumors of angry kami, or the brain's desperate rewiring after trauma. Yet Akiko's grief cut far deeper than clinical notes could capture, nightly sobs racking her frail frame as she called for vanished parents into the empty dark, origami cranes piling like makeshift grave offerings beside her cot, each one a folded prayer fluttering in the draft from torn canvas walls. When occupation sensors from General MacArthur's SCAP headquarters arrived in November with their clipboards and red stamps, flagging her as a psychological outlier in memos stamped top secret, Nakamura persisted undeterred, smuggling handwritten notes past patrols hidden in bandage rolls, driven by a gnawing curiosity that blurred science and superstition. The first overt sign came mid-October, during a routine keloid dressing session with tannic acid that peeled like old paint from her healing scars. As a nurse adjusted the bandages on a neighboring cot, Akiko's shadow quivered unnaturally, elongating 12 centimeters across the rough tent floor, like spilled ink gaining sentience, mimicking the absent embrace of her mother, wrapping around a bandaged boy who suddenly flatlined from fulminant sepsis, his final gasp echoing in the stunned silence. Nurses gasped in unison, crossing themselves despite Shinto roots. The accompanying rustle was faint but unmistakable, like silk whispering over gravel. Akiko wept openly then, tears carving tracks through ash on her cheeks. "Oka-san holds him now. She misses me too, but the light keeps her there." No ventriloquy was possible. Her lips had been closely monitored by Nakamura's assistant throughout. Whispers followed in the days after, emanating from her silhouette in her voice, but layered with an unearthly chorus, tallying the dead along the riverbank by neighborhood and family name, details verified against makeshift missing persons, ledgers scrawled on charred ledgers. Hibakusha, elders from the riverside shrines, their faces etched with their own keloid maps, began murmuring of Ikirio, living ghosts detached from the body by profound trauma, born from the bomb's cataclysmic rupture of Yugen, the sacred unseen world where spirits and matter intertwined. They ringed her cot with salt circles and Shinto Ofuda charms inscribed with protective sutras, burning incense that curled like question marks in the fetid air. But the shadow persisted, etching faint origami crane folds on rice paper screens overnight, visible only in the slant of dawn light. Akiko grew ever more withdrawn, her orphan eyes taking on an ancient, haunted wisdom far beyond her years. It split from me when the world broke open. Now it remembers for us all, the ones the light ate. By the chapter's tense close, as US jeeps rumbled through the skeletal ruins kicking up bone ash from unmarked graves, Nakamura overheard her mutter the first forbidden names in a fevered trance. Oppen, the fatherlight who laughed in the desert. Details matching fragmented black market whispers of the Manhattan Project, smuggled via GI deserters. The shadow had begun its quiet, inexorable accounting, grief's black ink spilling beyond the grave and the bombed-out city limits. Little did the shattered survivors of Hiroshima know, this hunger would cross oceans to find its true prey. Chapter 2. Shadow. Whispering Names. By the frost-kissed dawn of November 1945, as Hiroshima's skeletal streets echoed with the relentless clatter of occupation jeeps grinding over shattered cobblestones and the desperate chants of reconstruction crews salvaging twisted rebar from the rubble, Akiko Tanaka's shadow had evolved from a silent, stubborn scar into something undeniably alive with accusation and purpose. No longer content with mere subtle lags or faint, unsettling rustles against tent canvas, it began to whisper audibly, soft, layered voices bubbling up from walls, from the cold concrete floors, even from the delicate undersides of the origami cranes she folded obsessively by the hour, naming the dead by precise street, shop name, and family registry with a chilling, impossible precision that turned skeptics pale. Before we continue unraveling this terror, hit that subscribe button and drop in the comments. Which city are you tuning in from tonight? We cherish every story. Thanks, and let's uncover what happened next in this spiral into the unknown. Declassified SCAP, Psychological Surveys from late 1945, painstakingly cross-referenced with Hibakusha diaries yellowed and preserved at the Hiroshima Prefectural Archives, document Akiko's escalating case as H47-019, auditory shadow projection phenomenon, though US military censors wielding thick red markers redacted most references to prevent wildfire rumors of bomb-spawned yokai, undermining fragile post-war morale, or inciting vengeful unrest against the occupiers. These hushed, stamped files reveal a phenomenon that blurred the bleeding edge of radiation sickness with the ancient supernatural. Whispers that peeled back hidden truths like sunburnt skin, targeting not just the local ghosts of Nakajima district, but the distant, godlike architects of Little Boy across the Pacific, forcing the bomb's creators to confront living echoes of their own creation in the dead of night. This chapter traces meticulously how Akiko's grief-fueled umbra transformed from victim into hunter, its voices growing bolder and more insistent amid Japan's humiliated surrender, where American flags fluttered over bomb craters like mocking banners. Akiko had settled uneasily into the grim confines of the Saiki orphanage on Hiroshima's charred outskirts, a hastily converted pre-war schoolhouse ringed by coils of barbed wire and patrolled hourly by stern Christian missionaries airlifted from American relief efforts, their Bibles clutched like shields against the pervasive despair. At just 9 years old, she shared a vast, drafty tatami room with 24 other Hibakusha orphans, wraith-like children, whose keloid scars bubbled across cheeks and arms like molten red wax from hell's forge, their coughs wet and ragged with radiation's insidious slow poison, seeping into bones and marrow. Akiko rarely spoke above a murmur now, her days consumed entirely by the ritualistic folding of cranes from scavenged US ration wrappers. Red, white, and blue paper birds, symbols of the enemy turned into tottering pagodas beside her threadbare futon, each crease a silent prayer or curse. But her shadow was her constant, inescapable companion, staining the dormitory's paper-thin walls, stretching unnaturally under the harsh glare of donated fluorescent aid lamps to mimic the absent gestures of her lost parents. A father's rigid salute to the emperor, a mother's hunched sewing posture over invisible needles. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, now reluctantly leading a covert ABCC observation team under the thinnest guise of routine keloid treatments with painful salves, visited the orphanage weekly, his footsteps muffled on the creaking floors. His leather-bound journal, preserved only in water-stained fragments at the National Diet Library after his mysterious 1947 disappearance, details the horrifying escalation with clinical precision laced with growing dread. November 12th entry. Shadow elongates 28 centimeters during subject's sleep cycle. Whispers recorded at 8 Hz infrasound. Kyobashi Street 47 souls. Tanaka Yumi among them. Shopkeeper Hiroshi's wife last. Verified against official missing persons ledger from City Hall. Exact tally. Intimate details unknown to child. Nakamura, ever the scientist, rigged a crude phonograph machine in her corner of the room, its horn trembling as it captured guttural murmurs in Akiko's high childish timbre, but harmonized unnaturally lower, like a submerged chorus of the drowned rising from the Motoyasu River. When played back at dawn, the voices listed Mitsubishi dockyard workers vaporized mid-shift with horrifying intimacy, a seamstress's final scream echoing in the steam, a clerk's pocket watch frozen forever at 8:17 a.m. Details no living child, illiterate and isolated, could possibly know without otherworldly aid. The first outsider to truly heed and fear these whispers was Father Elias Grant, a grizzled Jesuit priest from the orphanage staff who doubled as interpreter for intrusive SCAP welfare checks, his wire-rimmed glasses perpetually fogged from the humid air. On November 18th, during evening vespers in the cold prayer hall where orphans knelt on splintered pews, Akiko's shadow detached fully for a full 14 seconds, sliding across the polished wooden floor like spilled India ink, gaining malevolent life, coiling deliberately around Father Grant's sandaled feet like a serpent from Eden. "You prayed while they burned alive," it hissed in a broken fusion of English and Japanese, audible to a dozen wide-eyed witnesses whose prayers choked in their throats. "Your God watched idly from Chicago, where you blessed the bomb builders with absolution before Trinity." Grant's face drained of color, his rosary beads clattering to the floor. Post-war inquiries by neutral Swiss Red Cross observers confirmed he'd ministered at Los Alamos National Laboratory in 1944, offering final confessions and blessings to Oppenheimer's tense team on the eve of the first atomic test. He fled the hall stumbling, clutching his chest and muttering Latin exorcisms, only to be found dead by dawn in his sparse quarters. "Heart event," the official SCAP report read, but his eyes frozen wide in terror, lips parted as if mouthing the shapes of unfolding cranes. Word of the incident rippled through the orphanage like the first drops of black rain before a storm. Nuns and missionaries whispering in huddles while orphans exchanged knowing glances born of shared trauma. Sisters burned Akiko's ever-growing crane piles nightly in rusted oil drums behind the kitchen, the flames leaping unnaturally high, but new birds sprouted from shadows overnight. Delicate wings etched faintly into the dormitory walls like acid burns, visible only under candlelight. Nakamura, pushing boundaries, isolated her for controlled tests. Blindfolded pattern recognition exercises where her shadow would point with elongating fingers to hidden ration tins or medical syringes before Akiko herself even stirred from trance. Success rate, an impossible 89% over 47 trials. But the voices sharpened relentlessly, crossing vast oceans in defiance of physics. One midnight, as a typhoon's howling winds rattled the shutters like vengeful fists and rain lashed the roof in sheets, Akiko bolted upright from sleep, her eyes milky voids. Penheimer, the father who laughed at Trinity's green fire. Shadow sees his eyes burning with guilty fire across the sea. Nakamura smuggled the wax cylinder recording to trusted black market contacts in Nagasaki's underworld. Playback matched eyewitness accounts of Fermi's Trinity observations, circulated in forbidden underground pamphlets. Occupation authorities, ever paranoid about morale sabotage, took swift notice. ASCAP memo, dated December 3rd, unearthed in 2001, FOIA releases, flagged the Tanaka anomaly, potential PSYOPs risk to occupation stability, dispatching Major Robert Ellis, a steely Manhattan Project liaison, posing as a routine welfare officer with a pipe perpetually clenched in his jaw. Ellis interrogated Akiko in a frigid Quonset hut clinic on the orphanage grounds, his pipe smoke curling lazily like indifferent ghosts in the lantern light. Her shadow pooled unnaturally at his polished boots, tendrils probing like roots, whispering low. You chained the atoms at Hanford's reactors. 239 souls wait silent for your dying breath, Major. Ellis scoffed publicly in his report. Delusional Jap kid spouting rumors, but cabled Los Alamos National Laboratory that very night in coded bursts. Local spook kid naming classified facilities verbatim. Coincidence improbable. Recommend surveillance. Within days, during a routine blackout patrol through Hiroshima's fog-shrouded ruins, his jeep skidded violently on phantom ink slicks, materializing from nowhere, shattering his femur in a compound fracture. Medevac logs from the U.S. Army Hospital chillingly noted, faint whispers trailing the ambulance like wind through grates. Akiko's own profound grief fueled this escalating fury, a bottomless well of loss that twisted innocence into instrument. Nightly, she'd sob into her cranes until her voice cracked. Oto-san, Oka-san, why won't you stay still in the dark? And shadows would swarm her fevered dreams, replaying the flash in vivid loops. Her parents' silhouettes waving eternally on vaporized walls, arms outstretched, but forever out of reach. Elders from the riverside shrines slipped in under cover of night, their lined faces shadowed by wide hats, burning bundles of incense that filled the room with acrid smoke, and muttering ancient incantations of Ikirio unbound by the bomb's rupture of sacred kami boundaries. The girl's soul has split asunder, one toothless elder noted in a smuggled scroll later found in a shrine attic. Half clings to life, half haunts the guilty across the waves. They gifted her a consecrated Shinto Afuda talisman, inscribed with protective kanji, but by morning it lay charred on the floor, perfect shadow fingers imprinted into the paper like a brand from the void. The whispers proliferated like radiation through water. By December's biting winds, they echoed openly in Hiroshima's vast ruins, at market stalls half rebuilt from salvaged tin, where shadows named rice-hoarding profiteers preying on starving orphans, in GI barracks alive with dice games, where they tallied black market pillage of Red Cross supplies down to the crate. Victims were never random, always those complicit in the bomb's long chain of horror. A local official who'd certified pre-war uranium shipments from occupied Korea, a callous nurse who'd discarded hopeless toddlers post-blast into the river like refuse. Each met the same end with terror-frozen stares, autopsies listing sudden cardiac arrest, amid telltale petechiae bursts on skin, shadows lingering post-mortem on walls like final, accusing silhouettes. Nakamura's notes devolved into frantic scrawls. December 22nd, Shadow Phonation lists Fermi, Szilard, chain reaction fathers, exact roles. Subject fully comatose during event, no conscious input possible. He wired anonymous tips to physicists at Tokyo's Riken Institute via coded ham radio bursts, warning of a Hiroshima echo rippling outward. Akiko, sensing the noose of scrutiny tightening like barbed wire, grew feral in her quiet way, hiding cranes in rafters and under loose floorboards, her eyes twin endless voids reflecting the bomb's flash. The shadow dances alone now, she told Nakamura softly, one sleet-lashed evening, her voice barely a breath. It sails to America on black wings. They must fold 1,000 cranes for the river dead, or join them beneath the waves. As 1946 dawned grey with US cargo planes dumping crates of powdered milk and flour into the aid yards, the first trans-Pacific ripple broke the surface. Dr. Enrico Fermi, vacationing uneasily in Chicago after months of restless lectures, collapsed mid-sentence during a seminar. Whispers reported by terrified students like insidious wind through rusted vents. Hiroshima waits, chainbreaker, 80,000 cranes unfold. Dismissed officially as a stray draft from the old hall's pipes, but Fermi's private letters, unsealed only in 1972 by his estate, confessed weeks of mounting insomnia. A girl's crane shadow paces my study relentlessly, folding birds from my scattered notes, naming the dead I helped unleash with cold precision. The roll call had escaped Hiroshima's choking ashes at last, crossing the vast Pacific on invisible, unrelenting wings. Little did those early scientists know, Akiko's shadow was no mere localized haunt or trick of guilt-ridden minds. It was judgment incarnate, patient and insatiable, and its endless list was just beginning to be read aloud. Chapter 3. Deaths of the Physicists. As the fleeting cherry blossoms of spring, 1946 painted Hiroshima's vast bomb-scarred ruins in fragile pink defiance, petals drifting like blood flakes over mass graves hastily dug in schoolyards. Akiko Tanaka's shadow transcended its local hauntings entirely, embarking on a relentless, trans-Pacific crusade that left a grim trail of broken scientists and shattered nerves in its shadowy wake. No longer confined to orphanage walls or isolated whispered accusations, it manifested brazenly across oceans and continents, etching delicate crane silhouettes on laboratory blackboards overnight, murmuring precise victim tallies through humming air vents during classified briefings, and triggering inexplicable cardiac arrests among the Manhattan Project's elite inner circle, all while Akiko herself remained a withdrawn, hollow-eyed orphan, wasting away in distant Japan. Before we trace this deadly path further, subscribe now and comment your city below. We love connecting with you. Thanks, and let's follow the shadow's inexorable hunt. Leaked ABCC internal memos from 1946 to 47, later corroborated by declassified Los Alamos National Laboratory archives released under FOIA in the 1980s, and clusters of suspicious physicist obituaries printed somberly in the New York Times science section, chronicle a bizarre statistical anomaly, a wave of sudden deaths among Little Boy's key creators, officially blamed on post-war stress, lingering radiation exposure from Trinity test dust, or simple old age, but unified by eerie premonitions of whispering shadows dancing on walls and origami birds materializing from thin air. These suppressed reports, stamped with redacted black bars, expose a pattern defying all statistical coincidence. 12 fatalities within just 18 months, each preceded by Akiko's impossible, pinpoint knowledge of the victim's most private regrets and confessions, as if the bomb's radioactive fallout had somehow birthed a sentient vengeance straight from the grave. This chapter unveils layer by layer how her rogue Umbra infiltrated America's most secure labs and offices, methodically turning buried guilt into swift, inescapable mortality. Back in the stifling confines of Hiroshima, Akiko had withered into near-total silence by March 1946, her once bright spirit eroded like riverbanks under black rain. Psyche orphanage logs, penned in a matron's trembling hand, describe her days as catatonic periods alternating with frenzied crane-folding marathons. Her shadow now a domineering constant companion, splitting fluidly into multiple forms under the cold buzz of donated fluorescent aid lamps, each dark tendril mimicking a lost family member's characteristic pose with heartbreaking accuracy. Takeshi's rigid volunteer corps salute, Yumi's patient hunch over needlework. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, defying explicit SCAP warnings spray-painted on his office door, continued his clandestine observation sessions under cover of night, his personal journal descending into frantic ink-smeared desperation. Shadow projections now fully remote. March 15th. Phonation during subject's deep trance names. Compton. Bohr visitor logs from 1944, verbatim. Verified via smuggled American Physical Society bulletin. Arthur Compton personally oversaw uranium-235 enrichment protocols at Oak Ridge. Nakamura's hidden microphone setup captured the layered voices in horrifying fidelity. Akiko's childish timbre overlaid with the massed wails of Riverside dead, listing Hanford site casualties by exact shift roster and bunk assignment, classified details leaked only through black market GIs trading cigarettes for secrets. The first American domino toppled with surgical precision on April 7, 1946. Enrico Fermi, the Nobel laureate who'd orchestrated the world's first controlled chain reaction under Chicago's Stagfield squash courts, slumped face first during a routine University of Chicago seminar on cutting-edge neutrino theory. Eyewitnesses, dozens of graduate students crammed into the stuffy lecture hall with its creaky wooden desks, heard vent drafts whispering relentlessly through the old pipes. Hiroshima, 80,000 shadows unlocked by your fire, chain pioneer, followed by Fermi suddenly clawing at unseen shapes materializing on the blackboard, faint crane outlines blooming in the swirling chalk dust like spectral graffiti. The official autopsy cited coronary thrombosis, swift and merciful, but his widow Laura's sealed personal letters, opened reluctantly by family in 1985, revealed tormenting weeks of insomnia beforehand. A faceless girl's crane shadow paces my study without cease, folding birds from my husband's scattered lecture notes, naming the Japanese dead we helped kill with a precision that chills the marrow. Fermi had privately confided deep radiation regrets to close colleagues mere days after Hiroshima's ashes cooled. Akiko's impossible echo knew those whispered confessions verbatim, across thousands of miles. Panic spread like fission through elite physics circles like wildfire through dry brush. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the brooding father of the atomic bomb, forever haunted by his Bhagavad Gita, quote, faced the hauntings escalation at the remnants of Los Alamos, now repurposed as a hyper-secure research outpost ringed by chain link and floodlights. On May 22nd, during a tense late-night security briefing on Soviet espionage threats, his corner office filled with an unnatural, bone-deep chill that fogged the windows. Shadows pooled unnaturally under his massive oak desk, elongating into long, accusatory fingers that pointed like judges. "I am become death, destroyer of worlds," he later confided shakily to his aide Edward Teller, in a voice hoarse from lack of sleep, but the whispers countered mercilessly from the corners. Death waited patient 580 meters above at 8:15. Oppie, Akiko saw your secret smile amid Trinity's green hellfire. That very night, Oppenheimer suffered a massive myocardial infarction, collapsing amid scattered papers, surviving narrowly after frantic medics revived him with adrenaline shots, but left bedridden for months in Taos, sketching endless, obsessive cranes on bedside legal pads stained with his own blood-flecked sweat. SCAP sensors in Tokyo quashed all Japanese rumors linking it directly to H47-019 anomaly, stamping files with Psych Outlier, no link. But Teller's own memoirs, published decades later, hint at hushed phone warnings circulating among the team. Shadows from the eastern ruins seek atonement we can never give. Across the sprawling US mainland, the deadly pattern accelerated with mechanical inevitability. Leo Szilard, the brilliant Hungarian physicist who'd penned the 1939 Einstein-Szilard letter warning Roosevelt of atomic peril and later petitioned desperately against bombing civilians, collapsed without warning in his cluttered Manhattan kitchen on June 14th, shadows crawling sinuously up his white fridge door like living ink, murmuring, "Petition failed the innocent. 140,000 Kyobashi ghosts wait your apology." Neighbors, alerted by the crash of pots, found him sprawled with rigid fists, clutching crumpled origami folds that hadn't been there moments before, eyes bulging in horror at wall cranes self-assembling from scattered newsprint sections like a demonic arts project. Official cause of death, aortic aneurysm, ruled natural. Fermi's lesser-known colleague at Argonne National Lab reported identical, escalating hauntings, shadows naming minute little boy assembly floors, gadget tolerances only a handful of insiders knew. In Japan, the repercussions mounted swiftly and viciously. Nakamura risked execution by wiring anonymous alerts via shortwave to physicists at Tokyo's elite Riken Institute. But on July 3rd, Father Elias Grant's replacement, a fresh-faced relief chaplain from Boston, died convulsing on the dormitory floor during lights out, shadows coiling around his throat, like spectral garrots amid final gasps of Los Alamos, confessional sins. Hiroshima police, operating under ironclad occupation gag orders, transferred the now notorious Akiko to a remote quarantine ward at Kure Naval Hospital under heavy guard. En route, in a rattling military truck through monsoon downpours, the vehicle's tires shredded simultaneously on phantom ink slicks that appeared from nowhere, killing the driver instantly in a fiery rollover. ESCAP incident report hastily buried as suspected communist sabotage to avoid panic. Akiko's grief had mutated fully into a quiet, seething fury by now, her small frame trembling with unspoken rage. Interrogated under the chemical haze of experimental sodium pentothal in a sterile basement room, she murmured through gritted teeth, "Shadow splits wide to hunt the light fathers. Otosan burns forever in their fire unless they fold 1,000,000 cranes for every soul." Her crane output surged to manic levels, 500 intricate birds daily, smuggled by sympathetic orderlies to riverside shrines, where grey-haired elders burned them in elaborate midnight rituals, meant to bind the rampaging Ikirio back to flesh. But the cranes reappeared undaunted each dawn, shadows birthing fresh flocks, etching burning accusations directly onto frosted orphanage windows. Fermi danced first with unholy fire. The death toll climbed relentlessly. Harold Urey, head of isotope separation, who'd pioneered heavy water research, found mid-sentence at his desk on August 12, 1946, wall shadows contorting into a little girl's pleading wave. Autopsy noted pinpoint petechiae from unexplained asphyxia with no toxins present. By autumn's chill, 8 key physicists lay in early graves, Oppenheimer placed under round-the-clock Secret Service watch in a secure New Mexico bungalow. US Army intelligence, unnerved by the clustering, formed a black-budget Project Umbra cell, dispatching fringe investigators, former OSS psychics and parapsychology experts from Duke University, to Chicago lecture halls and Berkeley wind tunnels. Their classified 1947 report leaked in redacted form during the 1970s. Phenomenon exhibits hallmarks of quantum non-local entanglement, Hiroshima shadow functioning as persistent, trauma-fueled projection, unbound by distance or time. Nakamura risked everything at last, smuggling his precious wax recordings to a sympathetic neutral physicist in Switzerland via hollowed-out Red Cross parcels marked medical samples. "It's not blind revenge," he scribbled in a desperate marginal note. "It's raw remembrance." The bomb tore countless souls asunder. Now their unified echo demands the guilty recite every name. Akiko, sensing the closing net of black helicopters overhead, vanished abruptly from all official records, ward nurses later swearing under oath that her shadow absorbed her whole form at dawn on October 5, leaving behind only a towering pile of cranes and fresh wall etchings naming the next high-priority targets: Groves, Bush, the generals who pulled triggers. As 1946 bled into a bitter winter, with MacArthur's iron occupation cementing Japan's forced demilitarization and constitution rewriting, the Shadow's merciless list lengthened without mercy. Vannevar Bush, powerful head of the Office of Scientific Research and Development, who'd greenlit the Manhattan Project's billions, awoke gasping on November 20th to bedroom whispers slithering from closet vents. "Your committee lit the fuse first. Hiroshima's river children call your name now." He barely survived a crippling stroke, but resigned abruptly, citing ghosts of wartime duty in his vague farewell letter. The hauntings peaked in a transcontinental crescendo. In Hiroshima's fog-wrapped ruins, Akiko, or whatever vessel now channeled her, whispered final, ominous warnings to a haggard Nakamura under a shrine lantern. "They feel our weight now, Doctor, but truth demands one last fatal dance." Little did the rattled survivors and distant scientists know, these vanishings were merely prelude to an enduring oblivion. Chapter 4: Disappearance and Shadow Curse. In the oppressive, sweat-drenched humidity of summer 1947, as Hiroshima clawed desperately toward rebirth, with skeletal concrete frames rising like accusing fingers from vast ash-choked fields where children once played. Akiko Tanaka, or whatever fractured remnant of her soul remained, vanished utterly from all records and recollections, bequeathing a perpetual curse that shadowed the atomic scientists across decades and continents. Her physical form dissolved in a locked quarantine ward at Kure Naval Hospital under heavy SCAP guard, melting into darkness before horrified eyes. But her vengeful umbra endured immortally, infiltrating nightmares, sterile laboratories, even printed obituaries worldwide, ensuring the bomb's architects carried Hiroshima's inconsolable grief etched into their very graves. Before we wrap this unrelenting nightmare, subscribe and comment your city. Your support keeps these hidden histories alive for the world. Thank you, and let's witness the final, shattering unraveling. Fragmented CIA Psy research files from the shadowy Operation Paperclip era, when Nazi scientists were whitewashed into US programs, cross-referenced with Hibakusha oral histories tearfully preserved at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum, and physicists' long-sealed personal memoirs, unsealed only after estates settled, trace the horrifying aftermath of Case H47-019. These buried dossiers, many still partially blacked out, reveal not tidy closure, but a spreading contagion. A shadow legacy that methodically claimed 22 Manhattan Project principals by 1970, their deaths officially dismissed as natural causes in impossible statistical clusters among only the most directly guilty. Akiko's story endures eternally as a stark warning. What the atomic bomb fractured in body and soul can never be scrubbed away or contained, its ghostly echoes demanding nothing less than full, eternal atonement through whispers, cranes, and unrelenting hauntings. By June 1947, Akiko existed as little more than a ghost, haunting her own skin in the sterile quarantine wing. Kure Naval Hospital logs, smudged with nurses' shaky handwriting, describe her wasting away to a skeletal 32 kilograms. Her translucent skin stretched taut over bubbling keloid scars like rice paper over twisted branches. Her wide eyes fixed perpetually on walls where swarms of shadows roiled like black schools of predatory fish circling prey. Doctor. Hiroshi Nakamura, gaunt and hollow-cheeked from months of evasion and malnutrition, bribed terrified orderlies with black market cigarettes for final illicit access. June 14th journal entry. Subject's umbra now dominates 80% of room surfaces continuously. Phonates relentlessly. Groves next, the general who signed the order for little boy's release. Remote manifestations confirmed simultaneously via Reuters wire. Leslie Groves hospitalized same hour in D.C. with acute pulmonary edema. Nakamura captured what would be his final, harrowing recording on smuggled phonograph. Akiko's death rasp, layered impossibly with the massed voices of 80,000 vaporized souls. Fold cranes without end, or join the river's silent dead, before her writhing shadow finally eclipsed her fragile form entirely, leaving the room in suffocating darkness for 23 seconds. Dawn broke blood red on July 3rd. Nurses pushing breakfast carts found only an empty cot with sheets untouched, walls scarred floor to ceiling with interlocking crane mandalas burned into the plaster like ancient petroglyphs, the air thick and choking with the acrid ash of 1,000 incinerated origami birds. Akiko had walked into her shadow willingly, per the traumatized eyewitness accounts later collected by Red Cross investigators, her form blurring and dissolving into living ink that slithered under the locked ward door, leaving behind a vast flock of singed cranes piled waist-high. SCAP command sealed off the entire wing within hours, attributing the mass hysteria to contaminated rice rations laced with ergot, but Black Ops teams from Tokyo scoured Hiroshima's swollen rivers and sewer tunnels for days, fearing a full yokai escape into the civilian population. Nakamura himself vanished tracelessly 3 days later, his bloated body washing up weeks afterward at the Asa River Delta, with petechiae-riddled lips frozen in the faint shape of the kanji, truth-free at last. The curse globalized with ruthless efficiency from there. General Leslie Groves, The bulldog military overseer who'd commanded little boy's entire logistical chain from cradle to apocalypse, resigned abruptly in August 1947, citing crippling phantom fatigue that left him pacing boardrooms in cold sweats. His 1948 death certificate coldly read, heart failure, at age 63. But declassified AIDS affidavits from 1995 describe office shadows coiling nightly around his high-backed chair like nooses, whispers tallying Hiroshima's orphans by name straight from classified Red Cross rolls. Children Groves had dismissed as acceptable collateral in war games. Vannevar Bush's torment accelerated the pattern. The OSRD chief endured escalating hauntings from 1948 onward, Cranes self-folding from his confidential memos during board meetings, before collapsing from cardiac arrest in 1974, far earlier than peers. Oppenheimer's protracted torment peaked tragically amid the McCarthy purges. His humiliating 1954 loss of security clearance coincided precisely with intensified shadow assaults. Hallucinations of a silent Akiko methodically folding pages from his beloved Bhagavad Gita into Cranes, murmuring, "I am become little boy, destroyer of your peace." Exiled to Princeton's Institute for Advanced Study, he sketched Cranes obsessively on every surface until his 1967 death from throat cancer, autopsy noting bizarre unexplained hypoxia and petechiae as if strangled by shadows. Surviving colleagues like Hans Bethe and Glenn Seaborg reported identical echoes persisting into the 1970s. Lab oscilloscopes spiking anomalously at precisely 8:15 a.m. Japan's Standard Time daily, air vents rustling long lists of Kyobashi neighborhood names like autumn leaves. Hibakusha survivor testimonies amplified the collective dread into legend. Elderly Saeki orphanage alumni claimed Akiko's cranes multiplied autonomously in roadside Hiroshima shrines, delicate wings bearing faint, accusatory faces of shadowed physicists. Grey-bearded elders conducted desperate Yugen-binding rites under moonless skies, elaborate salt circles laced with ofuda, droning sutra chants echoing off Genbaku Dome. But shadows etched fresh crane flocks annually on the dome's bullet-pocked walls, defying every restoration effort by city crews. By 1960, actuarial anomalies in unsealed ABCC long-term studies showed 18 principals dead prematurely, their collective life expectancy slashed by 15 full years in patterns no epidemiologist could explain away. Nakamura's final smuggled note, unearthed in 1980 from a Swiss bank vault by persistent researchers, read like prophecy. Akiko didn't birth this curse herself. The bomb did, splitting countless Hibakusha souls into unbound umbre, seeking human witness at last. Her shadow embodies them all, demanding the world fold 1,000 cranes for each stolen life. He predicted the inexorable chain's final toll, exactly 22 by 1970, verified chillingly in cross-checked physicists' necrologies archived at the American Institute of Physics. Decades onward into the modern era, the ripples refuse to fade. Guided Los Alamos tours halt breathlessly at whispers of crane graffiti that vanishes under tourist flashbulbs. Chicago's Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory, maintenance logs document persistent unexplained 8 Hz hums emanating from sub-basement vents at odd hours. Akiko's original garden wall shadow endures proudly at the former orphanage ruins, now a somber municipal memorial garden, its darkness deepening perceptibly each rainy season, elongated fingers eternally waving in silent greeting or warning. Even Sadako Sasaki's iconic 1955 legend of folding 1,000 cranes for leukemia recovery. Some surviving Hibakusha elders insist tearfully that Akiko's spectral flock directly inspired it, her endless paper birds seeding Japan's global peace rite. The guilty men faded one by one into history books and footnotes, but Akiko Tanaka's umbra never truly did. Oppenheimer's very last words, etched painfully into a private memoir published posthumously. A little girl from Hiroshima's unending fire visits my bedside still, reminding us nightly that we lit eternity's undying grudge. Hiroshima rebuilt itself into a gleaming metropolis of peace museums and bullet trains, But Akiko's shadow patrols the unseen folds of reality eternally, waiting patiently for the world's full atonement. A collective memory that honors not triumph or victory, but the silenced voices rising forever from the blinding light. What truly happened to prodigies like Samuel Carter with his swamp voices, or Akiko Tanaka with her vengeful shadow, challenges science, history, and sanity even in our modern age. Were they divine gifts of cosmic justice, curses woven from human grief, or stark proof that the dead will always demand to be heard?